continuation with topic called residential status in individual. Residential status. Before going to learn residential status, you are supposed to learn who is a resident. We use different terms called resident, NRI, non-resident Indian, NRI. And what is this impact in income tax? How it is going to influence in income tax? When income tax department is going to impose income tax or levy income tax on an individual, the income tax department will classify the individual into three categories. That is called residential status as per Income Tax Act 1961. What do you mean by residential status as per Income Tax Act 1961? The income tax department is going to classify the individual into three categories. Sorry. Resident, not ordinary resident, non-resident. Based on this, the income tax department is going to impose or levy tax on an individual. The individual is classified into three categories: resident, ROR, resident, ordinary resident, resident but not ordinary resident, RNOR, resident but not ordinary resident, non-resident. Now the question arises, how we are going to determine whether the individual is a resident, not ordinary resident, non-resident, based on the basic conditions and additional conditions. According to Income Tax Act 1961 under Section 6, there are certain basic conditions. And the additional conditions, Section 6, subsection 6, explains the additional conditions. Which are the basic conditions? There are two basic conditions. And there are two additional conditions. In the screen, you're going to make out which are those two basic conditions, which are those two additional conditions. Basic conditions. If an individual stays up to 180 days in the previous year, that is, for this assessment year, 23-24 is the previous year. If minimum period 182 days he was there in India in the previous year, he or she satisfied the first basic conditions. If the individual fails to satisfy the first basic condition, we need to see the second basic condition. What is the second basic condition? In the previous year, that individual should be there in India for 60 days and plus 360 days in the 4 previous years preceding to the previous year. That is, within the previous year, in the 4 previous years, if an individual was there in India for 365 days plus 60 days in the previous year, he satisfies the second basic condition. The satisfying the second basic condition is for that individual who fails to satisfy the first basic condition. Then, which are these additional conditions? In the 7 previous year, the individual should be for a period of 730 days. Then, preceding the previous year, then out of 10 previous years, that person should be a resident for 2 previous years. Then he or she is said to be satisfied 2 additional conditions. There are 2 basic conditions, 2 additional conditions. Now, the question arises, who is a resident, who is a not ordinary resident, who is a non-resident? If an individual satisfies any one of the basic conditions, and both the additional conditions. That is, there are two basic conditions, two additional conditions. If an individual satisfies any one of the basic conditions and satisfies both the additional conditions, then he or she said to be resident, ordinary resident. But ordinary resident. Then if the individual satisfies any one of the basic conditions, fails to satisfy both the additional conditions, then he or she is said to be resident but not ordinary resident. If any one basic condition is satisfied and fails to satisfy both the additional conditions, on the other way, if he satisfies one additional conditions, then he or she is said to be not ordinary resident. Then who is a non-resident? If a person fails to satisfy any one of the basic conditions, that is less than 182 days in the previous year, less than 182 days in the previous year, then 60 days in the previous year, and 365 days in the 4 previous years preceding the previous year. If out of two basic conditions, if the individual fails to satisfy any one basic condition, then question of satisfying the additional condition doesn't arise at all. We can come to the conclusion that he is it or she is it a non-resident. For income tax calculation, this is residential status of an individual. We have explained, we can make out from this chart, this is a residential status of an individual. Then any doubts, clarification, please.